Hello everybody, welcome to the Wonky Angle, where I talk about electronic music, both new and old, and today I'm talking about the new EP from Aphex Twin, Collapse. Oh boy. So, obviously given the fact that I've done an in-depth discography review of Aphex Twin, I was going to have to cover this whether I liked it or not. This ordinarily wouldn't be a problem, because I think as I've made it clear in the past, I love Aphex Twin. The guy has 3 of my all-time favorite albums, with his 2 selected ambient works albums, as well as Drux, or Drux, depending on who you ask. But even on top of having those 3 albums, which have been such a big part of my life, there's really no denying the fact that this man is one of the most influential names in electronic music ever. Like, he's on the same level as Trough and Brian Eno in that department. His cult status is completely unrivaled by basically anyone. This genre wouldn't look anything like the way it does right now if not for RDJ. I could gush more, but I have several videos explaining in detail what I think about his stuff. Link to that playlist is in the description. The problem, though, is that as of the last couple of years, I just haven't really enjoyed much of anything RDJ's had to offer. The last release from him I really liked and kept around on my iPod was his last mainline album, Cyro, in 2014. And even that one had to grow on me over a really long time. I wouldn't deny that album's pretty great to me now, but basically everything he's come out with after Cyro has been underwhelming. Of course, most people still love the stuff he came out with afterwards, so feel free to take me with a grain of salt on any of this, but from my personal perspective, nothing he's pushed in the years following his last album has really risen above decent for me. I think the straw that broke the camel's back for me had to be his Cheetah EP, which, while not outright bad, was just kinda boring and sounded exactly like his last couple of releases. It wasn't anything interesting or original, it was pretty forgettable, kinda meh, and worst of all, I went in expecting it to be like that, because it just sounded like his other post-Cyro stuff. I guess a little more chill than that stuff, maybe. Thing is, Cheetah single-handedly killed any anticipation I might have possibly had for new Aphex Twin releases. Granted, I also got one of my most widely hated videos out of that EP as well, which was fun too, so I'm clearly in the minority of people frustrated with RDJ's recent stuff. I'll admit to not having loved every side project he's ever made in the first place, but even with older side projects that I didn't enjoy, he could at least be more interesting and get nearly every release to sound different. That is one of the main things that I've always loved about RDJ, that he was so versatile and had so many different facets to his sound. He's the kind of guy that I look to innovate. But a lot of these last couple of releases just had the same general vibe, and I was starting to actually get bored with the guy, which was kinda scary, honestly. When this Collapse EP was announced, I wasn't all that excited. I got the feeling RDJ was just gonna let me down again. But I did hear the teaser track, T69 Collapse, and I thought, okay, this is at very least a step up from his other recent stuff. Probably the best thing he put out since Cyro. The really chaotic drums on this track at least kinda drew me in and intrigued me. I was glad it at least had more energy to anything on his last bunch of projects. But I would also be lying if I said I thought it was incredible either. Like, I thought the melodies on top were just kinda meh, and it was a good track, but not a great one for me. I hoped that this EP could rise above the mediocrity of his recent work, but I didn't go into this with, soaring high expectations. So, how does the rest of the Collapse EP fare? Well, I think I more or less got what I expected to get. I mean, it's not Cheetah, and that's good. It's, again, probably better than any of his other post-Cyro releases, but T69 Collapse is a very good indication of exactly what you're getting into with the whole thing. Everything sounds like that. Very fast-paced, dense, full of edits and crazy drum and bass percussion, featuring airy and abstract melodies that resemble those on Cyro and other more recent RDJ works. It's impressive, sure, but, I mean, of course RDJ can make impressive stuff. It's still really not that out of the box. It meets, baseline expectations for what an Aphex Twin EP should be like, and doesn't really go the extra mile for me on any of it. Nothing that really surprised me in any way. I do like the arrangements a lot more this time around. It gives me more hope for the future than Cheetah did. But it still feels like his last handful of projects, because it still feels like it took from the exact same set of sounds and synth settings. Even if he didn't actually take from the exact same sounds and synth settings. I've seen the insanely long list of synth gear he uses, but I don't know, all these projects have seriously ran together for me. This is an improvement, I'll give him that, but I still don't think there's much of anything here you couldn't just get already out of a previous RDJ project. Especially the stuff he did as the Tuss. It just sounds exactly like this. Now if I just treat this as another low-key side project, like if it was a Tuss EP, I'm perfectly fine with it. But I also know because it was released as an Aphex Twin project, people are going to completely lose their shit over it and treat it as if it's a giant main event that sounds like nothing else he's ever done before. I mean, if you do think that, it's cool. But I'm probably not going to get on the hype train myself. I think this is just average by his standards. I will say though, the EP has grown on me with the repeat listens. Now that I've more familiarized myself with it, it's, you know, I can groove with it more. Like, the melodies on T69 Collapse aren't as meh and bland as they were when I first heard them. It's become a pretty fun track, I will admit. I like how complex it is and the various phases it goes through. I like MT1T29R2 and its subtle childish vocal snippets and the video game bleeping, or the psychedelic ambience of Abundance 10 Edit, 2 R8s, FZ20m and a 909. I see he's on point with the ridiculous track titles as always. But that one's actually probably my favorite track on here. Some creepy kid promising to take you to the land of joy and happiness. Meanwhile, the sea of ambient synths, buzzing basses, and abstract percussion, or just give you this subtle dread, make you question how much joy and happiness you're actually going to be brought. And the storms of 808 beats in First 44 and the gritty acid grooves of PT Hex are fun too. I think overall, at the end of the day, this EP is nice. It's nice, but it's nothing special from him in my opinion. And I know it doesn't need to be, but like, if you've been able to get into the more recent stuff RDJ's been doing, this'll do you fine. But personally, while I think it's cool, I don't really see what Collapse offers that I couldn't get out of another side project of his. I'm probably going to give this the same numerical rating I gave out in my Cheetah video, but my rating on that would probably be at least a full point lower if it came out now. I'm already a lot softer than most critics when it comes to ratings, but 2 years ago I was even worse in that regard. But yeah, Collapse to me is overall feeling a 6.7. It's pretty nice. It's just short of a solid 7, but I'm probably not going to keep it. And now, assuming you didn't click towards the end of this video to find out my rating and get spoiled to what's going on right now, you might be wondering why is this little EP review so freaking long? That's because I decided to plan ahead on this one and turn this video from just a review of the Collapse EP into an entire second odds and ends video. What? That's right, by popular demand, I'm gonna go down a bunch of the other Aphex Twin EPs and side projects that I didn't already cover previously in other videos. Not necessarily everything that I didn't already touch on. I mean, RDJ has released way too freaking much stuff for me to be able to go over every single little thing he's ever done. But I'll cover a handful of other minor releases of his that have been more requested for me to cover at some point. None of these are super in-depth, just a couple of quick thoughts on each, and also none of these mean much to me personally either. Most of them I only just listened to the first time fairly recently. All of them after the first Odds and Ends video. I obviously do not have the years of nostalgia to go off like I did with most of the material on the first Odds and Ends video I did for him years ago, but I figured my thoughts on the actual Collapse EP were going to make for a pretty disappointing video just all on their own. Even if it has been a really long time since I got a video with mass dislikes and just massive angry vitriol across everybody. That's probably gonna happen anyway, but nah, this is probably better for both me and you guys. May as well try to make this video a little less disappointing, huh? So, let's get into some other side projects of his. So we'll start out with On. I initially skipped this one as I didn't think it was going to provide interesting discussion material, but I may as well cover it now. I rediscovered the title track from this EP when I was looking through it for the first Odds and Ends video. Really thought the bright, harp-like melody lines and the semi-abrasive I Care Because You Do style beat, if this had made that album, it had been one of the biggest highlights. The rest of the EP is a little hit and miss for me. I like the track D-Scape, given how it's basically the horror version of the title track with much creepier melodies attached. But I'm not huge on 73 Yips, which is just another Start As You Mean To Go On style abrasive techno track. Never been a mode of RDJ I've hugely cared for. And the similarly abrasive Zephyr has some decent atmosphere, but got a little tedious. I don't know. I'll give the EP credit for the 2 tracks I really did like, though. I will say it's worth checking out, and obviously fans of the more abrasive techno stuff he does will get their fair share. It's not the best thing RDJ's ever done, but nice stuff and worth it for the title track alone. I'm overall feeling a solid 7 out of 10 on EP. And then after that, we're going to do the Ventolin EP, which I skipped out on initially because I obviously do not like the original version. Now, I've had the appeal explained to me. I know it's meant to simulate an asthma attack, but it's still not fun for me to listen to. I really freaking hate that tinnitus ringing. But some people were bugging me to check this one out, knowing full well my thoughts on that track, so I decided I may as well oblige and see if there actually is some stuff here that I can enjoy. Obviously starts with the original version, which I've made my opinion clear on in the past, but there's 5 other alternate versions, which are really just completely separate tracks when you really get down to it. And I'll admit, there is good stuff here in the last 2/3 of this EP. I didn't care much for the Praise and Beeble mix, which is mostly less than interesting metallic clanking, and then over a full minute of awkward laughing, because RDJ, of course RDJ would give a track an outro of 1.5 minutes of awkward laughing. And while the Marizanvos mix builds up a pretty good beat for 1.5 minutes, also has a weird outro that I don't even know what it's supposed to be besides gross, I guess. Everything else, though, surprisingly good. I really like the Plain and Guari mix, which turned out to basically be a creepier alternate version of Calcut as a Twin, with occasional horn blares. The Coppice mix is a more low-key and more melodic track that sounded like it was going for a cheerful twist on some otherwise creepy sounds, like the opposite of certain parts of the Richard D. James album. And the melodies and beats are pretty nice. And finally, the Crow's Mengigus mix is like 2 different tracks in one. A clanky and acid-tinged intro leading into a much more melodic and bright second part that I enjoyed a lot, and when text-to-speech voice credit tacked on at the end. So overall, again, while I don't think Ventolin is an incredible EP, and my mind still hasn't changed on the original version of the track, I do think the EP works really well as a companion to the sounds explored on I Care Because You Do. If that was your favorite RDJ album, you'll love this stuff too, and even if I didn't enjoy all of it, I am genuinely glad I bothered to give it a shot. It's a solid 7 out of 10 for me as well. Right, so now let's get into the reason that Collapse didn't get a 7 from me. The Tuss. Alright, so RDJ has 2 big releases under this name, an album/EP called Rushup Edge, credited to someone named Karen Tregaskin, who is totally a real person, and another EP called Confederation Trough, credited to her definitely real twin brother Brian. Twins, get it? Anyways, when I was checking these out a while before Collapse came out, I thought I was going to get something really weird and different for RDJ, from what I'd heard people saying about it. Something darker, too. And I was initially disappointed to find these EPs pulled from that exact same sound palette that all his stuff since Cyro did. I guess it is in fact darker than the usual, but the sounds that go into it and the wonky structuring is pretty typical for him. Even the bass line in part of Last Rushup 10 reminds me of some of the bass lines from Cyro's title track. But I will admit, in spite of its not being that original sounding, I enjoyed it quite a bit. Packed to the brim with detail and has tons and tons of elements in each track too. The melodies is unconventional and all over the place as they typically are, or at least fun and enjoyable for what they are. The beats, as chaotic as they are, land in a satisfying way. The content well makes up for the synth tones coming off steel to me. It unfortunately doesn't give me a lot of discussion material. If I were to go down each track, I'd basically have the same things to say about all of them. And I've heard plenty of stuff RDJ's done in this vein. It didn't pop out as super memorable or out of the box like people were saying it was going to, at least not initially. Though that is probably more because I'm a lot more jaded on RDJ's recent stuff in this vein, and both of these came out several years before he really started sliding off for me, so it's excusable. Personal enjoyment-wise, I got more out of it than the vast majority of his recent work. Even coming back to it, despite similar structuring, I got a lot more out of it than even Collapse. Highlights on Rushup Edge include Synthicon 9, Last Rushup 10, and Death Fuck. Really like all the weird piano lines on that one. Think Rushup Edge overall is a 7.5 out of 10. And Confederation Trough, largely similar thoughts there. Though I guess it's, given it's shorter, I didn't enjoy it as much, and I guess I have individual things to say about each track. I wasn't huge on the opener, Fredugulon 6, found it kind of forgettable. But the bouncier beats on GX1 solo are neat, and the second track here, Alspaka, may be my favorite track out of the Tuss overall. Really like the melodies and vibe out of that one. That EP as a whole is probably a solid 7 out of 10 for me. So now let's go into some other more obscure aliases of his. Like, here's a 4-track self-titled EP under the name GAK. And this is basically a set of demos RDJ sent to Warp Records to see if he could get himself onto the roster. And Warp released it once RDJ really started to get some popular traction in '94. Yeah, it's nothing that interesting. I heard there's some theories it was meant as kind of an attempt to make his sound more like LFO, again to help him fit in with the label at the time. Yeah, I can see that. It does certainly aesthetically match up with some of the material on Frequencies. It's all very simplistic techno stuff that just has the same beats and tempos, very repetitive loops and melodies, just not really much to it at all. But, I don't know, I still got some enjoyment out of it. The riffs, while repetitive, were at least mildly engaging, especially the pianos on GAK 1, some of the alien whistling on GAK 3, and especially the more chilled out grooves on GAK 4, the latter of which is probably the best track in the bunch, even if it got maybe a bit stale by the end. But if you ask me, this EP is really just for RDJ completionists, and not the kind of thing super worth going out of your way for. I much more recommend the actual LFO's Frequencies album over this. Very similar stuff with more substance and more replay value. This EP is probably like a 6.3 out of 10 for me. It's okay, but not essential. By the way, if you were wondering about my thoughts on his Bradley Strider material, basically same deal there. I didn't really have much of substance to say about those, so I'm just mentioning them here. A bit more interesting single from the guy, though, is the one he released under the name Power Pill, called Pac-Man, which is RDJ's 1992 remix of the Pac-Man theme. Yeah, that actually happened. And yeah, the single is basically just a joke when you really get down to it. Really not the kind of thing you listen to more than once. I got sick of hearing that same riff over and over through the 4 different versions. I mean, I guess it's a fun idea, but apart from like one part in Choki's high score mix where it suddenly switches over to some weird piano-driven deep house thing for like 30 seconds, and Mickey Finn's Yum Yum mix, which brings in entirely different bass lines that aren't related to anything, this single doesn't survive just beyond a small novelty that works for one track. I think it's kind of telling that the 2 remixes by other people were better than RDJ's own stuff. I mean, cool that RDJ has this thing that no one in the right mind would ever think to take seriously, alongside expert knob twiddlers, but I don't know, Logan Rockwitch this ain't. I won't rate this one. And speaking of Logan Rockwitch, let's move on to Melodies from Mars. This is a full, unreleased, proper Aphex Twin album. Apparently given out to friends of RDJs, but not the world at large. Unsurprisingly, a lot of people salivate over this one. It's a whole unreleased Aphex Twin album from 1995 when the guy was still well in his creative peak prime. I personally skipped out on this one before, as I figured it was probably left unpublished for a reason, and the fact that it has tracks in common with the Richard E. James album, I thought it was going to mean we were going to get something along those lines. Though I've also heard rumors that RDJ plans to properly release this at some point. I don't know any details though. Was it a SoundCloud dump thing? I'm sure people will correct me in the comments what the deal is regarding a proper release. But I just started a YouTube rip though, and after actually listening to it, I'll admit Melodies from Mars is not just more of the same from the RDJ album. It does manage to set itself apart as its own thing. Hearing the rip currently on YouTube does come off to me a bit like listening to Boards of Canada's old tunes comps. Really low quality audio here, but this album does have its own vibe separate from his other mainline albums. Melodies from Mars is a good title for this album actually. It's very alien sounding stuff with some vintage sounding synths, many of which gave it a campy 60s sci-fi sort of feel. I don't exactly have a ton of detailed thoughts on it though. The Figure Bib demo does fit very well in this track listing, and it didn't get grating to me like the final album version on some listens. Well, I guess it helps that I haven't been listening this album like 10 times in a row over the course of a few days like I did with my review of the RDJ album. And Logan Rock, which does maybe feel a bit out of place, but it'll probably made more sense here than it did on the actual RDJ album. But yeah, there are a couple of other highlights here that I suppose stuck out to me. Track 4 particularly stuck out to me on first listen. I think that's my favorite one. Just really enjoy the melodies on that one. Sounds like a lost Super Mario 64 soundtrack piece in some areas. And the 8-bit melodies of track 10 were really fun too, as was the more fast-paced fun of track 11. And the closer brought back the pizzicato strings from Girl Boy and presented them in a different and more low-key, but still pretty neat way. I think every track on here had some kind of quirky alien personality to it that comes across well, even though not many of them give me much to say. As a whole, I guess it was fun, but I don't know if I'm personally gonna return to it a lot. The melodies are certainly good, and it is at least a unique album that only RDJ could have made, but I didn't find myself that engaged by it as a whole. Fell in the background pretty easily. It's nothing life-changing for me personally, but I will give Melodies from Mars this. It passes one hurdle that so many other RDJ releases haven't as of late. I mean, my biggest problem with RDJ's most recent material is that it all kind of sounds the same to me. Melodies from Mars doesn't sound quite like any other RDJ project I've heard, which is a huge plus for me. So in the end, even though I wasn't precisely blown away by it, I'd still recommend it. Probably feeling a 7.5 out of 10. And we're going to finish this off with 26 mixes for cash. This is basically a big compilation of a bunch of remixes that RDJ's done over the years, and this isn't going to be an in-depth breakdown how I thought RDJ added onto each of the original versions of these tracks because this video is way too long already. I will say I like the idea of a remix comp like this where it's linked together by the artist doing the remixing rather than the artist being remixed, as usually is the case with remix albums. This way it does all generally sound like Aphex Twin, but with a lot more variety and interesting stuff brought in by all the artists he's covering. He's making them all sound more like him, with the exception of his remix of Philip Glass's version of David Bowie's Heroes, which, while cool, did not really sound like RDJ at all to me. Or that German hip-hop thing that opens the second disc also does not really sound like him. But everything else out of context sounded just like something RDJ would do. And generally speaking, it's all pretty well executed. The first 3 tracks on here all start you out on really strong notes, really nice melodies and sound design. From the light catchiness of the Seafeel remix to the strange and complex but beautiful orchestrations of the Gavin Bryars remix, to the laid-back lounge vibes of the Gentle People remix. All could go on a little long maybe, but it really pulled me into this thing right from the get-go. And the rest, while there certainly wasn't much effort here to make it feel cohesive or fit together, I don't think there was anything here I outright disliked, and the variety of artists only helped the release become more engaging. Maybe I wasn't huge on the Mescalinum United remix, but that kind of more abrasive hardcore stuff has never been my thing. I can't say I thought it was bad either. Other highlights for me include the Nobukazu Takamura Let My Fish Loose remix that closes the first disc, which has a bit of a jazzy flair to it at first and a surprisingly captivating, almost fairy tale vibe to it, even if there are some high-pitched synths and pitched-up vocals in parts that I'm not huge on. Maybe not the most RDJ sounding thing on here, but I guess it wouldn't be totally out of place among some of those more childish pieces on the RDJ album like Goon Goompas. In the second half, I enjoyed the Philip Bowen The Voodoo Club remix, which was also very much the kind of thing you'd hear on the RDJ album. The alternate take on Windalicker and the DMX Crew remix were fun. The Mike Flowers Pops remix was a really nice way to end the whole comp out. And of course I gotta mention the 808 State remix. Unsurprisingly quite enjoyed that one, having always been a big 808 State fan. Hearing this quirky alternate take on Flow Coma was very enjoyable, maybe even a little better than the original. So yeah, overall I think this was probably the most pleasant surprise of the releases I'm covering in this video, especially given my general distaste towards remix albums in general. I hesitate to call it great. I do think the comp is pretty dang long at almost 2.5 hours, and that is probably going to take away from its replay value a fair bit. And the actual production was not incredible. There were more than a few moments where I had some clipping audio that I gotta give the side eye to. But I'll admit, I think this collection is actually really solid, really fun, actually worth seeking out. This has earned my full-on endorsement. I'm overall feeling a 7.7 out of 10. And I think I'll end the video there, finish on a positive note. I'll admit my exploration of these rare world releases has not changed my personal stance that the guy's best material is probably also among his easiest to find, like his main albums and more popular EPs, but whatever. I am glad that I went through some of these. I'm sure this was better than just covering Collapse by itself. Obviously, I've still not covered literally everything RDJ's ever made, but I think I've gone over everything that I have actual things to say about. Sorry if the random one-off single he made by, I don't know, Q-Chastic is your favorite thing ever from RDJ. I think this is about it as far as RDJ side projects I have to add at this point, so I'll leave it at that. Of course, this is all just my opinion. You can feel free to disagree with it, but I'd like to hear your thoughts, so leave the comments in the comment thing down there. Shout out to my Patreon supporters. They're awesome people. If you want to add yourself to that list or make me review something, link to my Patreon is in the description. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's all for today. See you next time.